This photograph, likely shot in 1883, shows the vantage from a Brooklyn rooftop looking toward the brand new East River Bridge, better known as the Brooklyn Bridge, with Manhattan in the distance. The bridge opened on May 24th, 1883. The picture is part of two wood frames that contained glass plate images in what were known as dissolving views. One of the views was altered many years ago to give a look of sunrise, with lights on across the span of the new bridge and an orange glow in many of the east-facing windows. A label on the views reads, Trinity Optical Company, 150 Nassau Street, New York City, James W. Putnam, manager. 150 Nassau Street was the home of the American Tract Society, an evangelical organization that began printing pamphlets and books during the 19th century. A search of New York City directories showed that James W. Putnam was only listed by name between the years 1893 and 1897. Strangely enough, in those same city directories, there's no trace of a Trinity Optical Company. The only found historical record that mentioned Trinity Optical Company came from 1904. The publication, known as Obsolete American Securities and Corporations, listed Trinity Optical Company as having an office in New York, but said it was dissolved by 1897. Our objective: to find long-lost stories from history about the people who lived and worked in these buildings. We'll also look for clues that point to both where this photograph was shot and also when it was captured. Friday, December 26th, 1884, the day after Christmas. It's morning in New York, 23 degrees Fahrenheit, snow is falling. A tall man is walking down the street. He has light side whiskers and a mustache and is wearing a large overcoat and a derby hat. At the corner of Leroy and Hudson, he approaches a boy named Charlie Miller, who is about 11 or 12 years old. He asks Miller if he can deliver a bundle in brown wrapping paper and says he'll give him 10 cents for car fare and an additional 25 cents on his return, claiming he needs to return 2 books and simply wants help delivering the package, which is labeled Bookstore, 150 Nassau Street, the same address on the dissolving views. Miller agrees. The young boy makes his way toward 150 Nassau Street and arrives at the building for the American Tract Society just after noon. The New York Times reported, he set it down on the counter on a stack of sunshine for rainy days, Sunday school books, and waited until spoken to by a clerk named Henry Gurley, who asked if he was being waited on. Miller told Gurley that he had been told to return the package and that it contained books and a letter. Gurley carried the box to the back of the store and began to open it. He was soon joined by another clerk. Before completely opening the package, they noticed that a piece of emery paper was resting on the heads of several matches. "Bless me," said Mr. Gurley, "if I don't believe it's an infernal machine." All in the store retreated, and Anthony Comstock, who was in his office on the second floor, was sent for. The boy, Miller, was still looking about at the Christmas cards, and he was told to wait. Mr. Comstock rushed down the stairs, picked up the box, and saw at a glance that if the emery paper was moved across the heads of the matches, they might ignite. Mr. Comstock took the box to the 26th Precinct station house, where it was carefully placed on the sergeant's desk. "Well, here's a chance for my promotion," the sergeant said, as he moved as far away as he could and paid no attention to signal calls. Even Mr. Comstock drew back a little as the bottom was lifted off, and the infernal machine was exposed. The bomb was disarmed. Inside the bundle, the men found broken glass, nitric acid, and gunpowder. Miller was questioned and taken to the Tombs, a notorious jail, but was later released. Police investigated the corner where the man had approached him and the address where he had promised to give the boy the additional 25 cents, 475 Hudson Street. However, they were unable to find any leads. Opinions about the motive of the bomb maker varied. Some people believed the package was meant to explode on the ride over to the building. Gurley, the man who received the package from Miller, noted that the way the bomb was designed, simply dropping the box would have resulted in an explosion. Others contended it must have been an attack on the building's evangelical purpose, and that it was meant to go off inside of 150 Nassau Street. According to a report from the Landmarks Preservation Commission, ATS once boasted that the building is equipped with the latest and most approved appurtenances and apparatuses convenient or necessary for an office of the highest standard, including steam heating, electric and gas lighting, and 6 elevators placed in a curved arrangement. There was space for over 700 offices. The ground floor had 2 storefronts, the basement had 4 stores with entrances on Spruce Street, and there was a restaurant on the 22nd floor. In the photographs shown in both dissolving views, it was clear that the picture had been shot in Brooklyn from several blocks south of the Brooklyn Bridge. However, what was the address of the rooftop where the camera had been placed? 2 buildings were visible just under and to the right of the center of the picture. After further research of Brooklyn Heights, those same buildings were found. 4 windows on the left and 3 windows on the right. These appeared to match 31, 33, and 35 Cranberry Street. With only one photograph as a reference, it's somewhat difficult to tell just how far back from Cranberry Street the photographer had positioned the camera. It looked to be somewhat near the locations for Plymouth Church or Plymouth Church School. The best possible guess of where this photograph was taken from, 87 Hicks Street. Speaking of 87 Hicks Street, on June 2, 1898, believed to be 15 years after the photograph was taken, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle reported that a burglar had been arrested on the 5th floor of the very same building, which was likely the top floor. The newspaper reported there was much excitement in the apartment house at 87 Hicks Street late yesterday afternoon because of the report that a burglar had been captured red-handed in the rooms of William P. McLean on the 5th floor. A spunky young woman, the owner of the house, William E.S. Fales, a lawyer, and a policeman all assisted in the catch. 2 keys were found in the pockets of the man, and later another skeleton key, which was found to master the front door lock of McLean's rooms, was discovered on the stairs. The prisoner had 2 women's watches in his pocket, a number of addresses, and several notes in a queer, undecipherable shorthand in a notebook. When Officer Walker took him around to the Adams Street station and locked him up there on a charge of burglary, the prisoner said that he was Henry Gibson and that he lived with his wife and family on East 4th Street, Manhattan. The police believe that the accused is a practical thief, and they are trying to find an owner for the 2 watches that were found in his possession. New York City directories around the year 1898 made no mention of anyone named Henry Gibson living on East 4th Street. In February 1872, a boy named Edward Granger, whose parents lived in Albany, entered the Star Brewery to learn the brewery business, the Sun newspaper reported. His father was Mr. William Granger, a member of the Albany brewing firm of Coolidge, Pratt & Company, who had a branch office in New York. Young Edward found a place to stay by boarding with Henry C. Foster, who lived at 33 Cranberry St. After Edward had been in the home for a few weeks, he grew attached to Mr. Foster's daughter, Lenny, who was about 19 years old. Her parents encouraged their relationship. One night, Edward gave Lenny a diamond ring. She told him that she preferred to ask her father before intending to keep the gift. On the next day, Mr. Foster told her that he wouldn't approve of her keeping the ring unless it was his intention to marry her. Lenny did not acknowledge to her father that Edward had proposed and gave the ring back to him on the following day. The Sun newspaper continued its reporting. About the middle of March 1872, Edward complained of having an illness, and a physician pronounced it smallpox. The health authorities, after examining the case, consented that Edward should remain in the Fosters' home, but insisted that he should be quarantined in the attic. His father, William, was informed of his condition, and he journeyed from Albany to Brooklyn. Edward had been put in the attic, and a new stairway had been opened by which his nurse, named Mr. Murphy, could ascend and descend without mingling with the tenants of the house. It was on Saturday that a health physician told Mr. Foster that Edward might remain under his roof. However, according to the Sun newspaper, on the following Monday, Mr. Foster contacted Mr. Granger and told him the opposite about his son. He told Edward's father that the Board of Health insisted on his son being taken to the smallpox hospital. Being the caring and worrying father that he was, William asked if there was any way that Edward could avoid going to the smallpox hospital. Mr. Foster told Granger that $500 would do the trick. Mr. Granger then provided a $500 check to Mr. Foster. According to the reporting, Mr. Foster then told Mr. Granger that the money had satisfied the health authorities, and that Edward was to remain in the attic until he recovered. Sadly, soon after, Edward's condition grew worse. Just before he died, he asked his nurse, Mr. Murphy, to give the ring to Lenny. "Tell her to keep it as a keepsake from me," he said. Weeks later, Mr. Granger learned that the Board of Health had said that he could have remained in the care of Mr. Foster, and that he had been lied to about the $500 payment. Mr. Granger was in Albany at the time, so he asked Mr. Pratt of his firm Coolidge, Pratt & Company to pay a visit to Mr. Foster. When Mr. Pratt arrived, Mr. Foster was not at home. Instead, he was met by Mrs. Foster and Lenny, who, after some conversation, handed over the diamond ring. However, just as he was turning away to leave, he was met by Mr. Foster, who was arriving home. Foster threatened Pratt and eventually talked him into giving the ring back to his daughter. Granger's next move was to sue for the recovery of the $500 and the ring. He won back the $500, a court effectively acknowledging that Foster had lied to him about what the health authorities had said about Edward being able to remain in the attic. However, to recover the ring was a more difficult undertaking, as the Sun newspaper reported. The trial was closed in the Brooklyn City Court before Judge Thompson. For the defense, Mr. Murphy, who nursed Edward in his sickness, testified that the latter gave him the ring with instructions to give it to Lenny, that he had done as directed, and that he regarded it as an out-and-out gift to her. He repeated Edward's language, who, he said, appeared to think a great deal of her. Miss Foster testified that Edward had offered her the ring before, and that she had rejected it. That their relations were sufficiently friendly to warrant his tendering and her accepting such a gift. And that she has always regarded the ring as her personal property, made over to her by Edward Granger. Lenny, a beautiful brunette, was elegantly dressed and appeared to be a modest, quiet, and refined young woman. Her testimony created much feeling in her favor. Other members of the family also testified in her favor. While the trial was progressing, the courtroom was the scene of a unique incident. The witnesses on both sides had differed as to the value of the diamond ring. Those who professed to be experts appraised it as low as $20 and as high as $150. The damages asked for by Granger were $100. Suddenly, Mr. Welch, a member of the jury, arose and said, "Here, I have been a jeweler for 20 years. Let me see it." Mr. Wernberg, counsel for Granger, asked for Mr. Welch to be sworn in as a witness. The judge had a bit of a puzzled look on his face, and the lawyers and idlers pricked up their ears. The defense agreed, and Mr. Welch took the witness stand. He was sworn in, and after examining the ring, he testified that, in his opinion, $40 was its value. Granger was then awarded $40 by the jury, and the case was dismissed. In the photograph with Putnam's name on the dissolving views, off to the left-hand side, at the very edge of the picture, there appeared to be a mysterious feature adorning the rooftop of a house close to the water. A cupola with a view of the city and the Great Bridge. On February 25, 1911, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle published an article about the sale of 11 Cranberry Street, which went to a man named Charles Downing Lay. The Eagle reported, "It is one of the most substantially constructed edifices on the heights and has some unique features. There is a cupola or observatory on the roof, to which a winding staircase leads from the third floor, and from which an extended view of the river and adjacent portions of Manhattan and Brooklyn could be secured when it was first constructed. That view is now much circumscribed by the erection of such structures as the Hotel Margaret and the St. George in the vicinity. But good views can be had from it of both the Brooklyn and Manhattan bridges and the water underneath. And the water can also be seen further south." According to the newspaper's reporting, as of 1911, the old-time mansion still had an old-fashioned knocker on the basement door. On July 13, 1931, the Eagle printed an interview with Lay, the architect who had purchased the home in 1911. He resided at 11 Cranberry Street with his wife, Laura Gill. "We have a cupola there," Lay said, "where we can view the heart of the city. I'm so enthusiastic about the city, I even enjoy the tugboat whistles at night." In his Manhattan office at 40th Street and Park Avenue, a study of the paintings on his wall revealed that they, like many of the etchings, had been done by Lay. He added, "Those I do at my home in Brooklyn Heights. I call that my studio." Lay was known for his design of Queens Alley Pond Park, Brooklyn's Marine Park, the addition of 2,500 cherry trees at Grant's Tomb, was the consulting landscape architect to the Board of Design for the 1939 New York World's Fair, and contributed his architectural ingenuity on military projects during World War II, all according to the Cultural Landscape Foundation. The Eagle continued with its 1931 article. "Lay likes big cities, the bigger the better. For New York, 60 million people would not fees him." Lay confessed that he enjoyed subways, particularly in winter. Often, he makes extra trips. "Where else except in a big city could you get a 20-mile ride from outlying Brooklyn to the Bronx for a nickel," he said. Lay continued, "People complain of traffic, but really they get a sort of unholy joy out of it. Our city houses are compared to those of cliff dwellers, and our streets to canyons. But that is only a picturesque way of saying we admire them. Congestion is what we came here for, what we hunger for, what makes possible conveniences we could never get without it." On January 23, 1898, the Sun newspaper reported quite the story about a minister named James W. Putnam. This may have been the very same James W. Putnam mentioned on the dissolving views. The story began. The Reverend James W. Putnam, pastor of Trinity Baptist Church at 55th Street and Lexington Avenue, had an eventful ride on 5th Avenue yesterday morning. He began it on a bicycle and finished it in a beer wagon. In the interval, he was in danger of being trampled to death by two big Percheron horses attached to the wagon. Mr. Putnam lives at 145 East 55th Street, and at 11:30 o'clock was riding north along the avenue on his bicycle. Christopher Mohn, driver of a beer wagon for the Doelger Brewing Company, came through 96th Street at a rattling pace and swung into 5th Avenue, keeping on the wrong side of the street. Mr. Putnam tried to swerve aside to let the wagon go by, but did not have time and bumped into the horse. Bicycle policeman Casey had started in pursuit of the wagon, and he swung up alongside just as Putnam was thrown under the horse's heels. Jumping from his wheel, he grabbed Mr. Putnam and dragged him out of danger. Mr. Putnam was bruised and his clothing was soiled. His wheel was ruined. Mohn, the driver of the wagon, whipped up his horses and hurried down the avenue. Bicycle policeman Casey remounted his wheel and put after him. At 94th Street, bicycle policeman Dobson tried to head Mohn off. Mohn swung around the policeman and whipped his horses to a higher speed. Casey and Dobson ran up behind the wagon, grabbed the tailboard, kicked their wheels out from under them, and climbed into the wagon and over the beer kegs. They grappled with the driver, who showed fight, but was quickly pounded into submission. The policeman drove back, gave Mr. Putnam a seat beside them on the beer wagon, and drove the whole outfit to the Harlem court. A closer look at the great and mighty bridge, just next to the Brooklyn Tower, reveals a spiral staircase, a clue of when the picture was taken. Historical records and photographs have documented that these spiral stairways were used for the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge. It's unclear when they were dismantled, but the spiral staircases being visible may point to the fact that the picture was shot in 1883. On a similar note, on April 3, 1883, less than 2 months before the May 24th opening date for the bridge, the New York Times reported, "The capture of the bridge." "I don't know how to account for it," said Mr. Charles C. Marden, first assistant engineer of the Brooklyn Bridge, yesterday in referring to the unexpected capture of that structure by the rowdy hordes on Sunday. "We had never thought it necessary to have more than one watchman posted at the Brooklyn end and one on the New York side, since no attempt had ever been made to climb the barricades and invade the bridge. The watchmen tried in vain to stop the tide. Some climbed the cables and walked over the trusses, while the more ambitious ascended the spiral stairway to the top of the Brooklyn Pier until it was black with them. It is really wonderful that some were not killed in the performance of some of this lofty climbing. They seized everything that was loose and threw it into the water or at vessels passing underneath. They drove Flood, the watchman on the Brooklyn side, into his shanty and fired bolts and all sorts of missiles at the house. The other watchmen along the bridge they drove away too. By next Sunday, the barriers will be strengthened and 4 watchmen will be posted at each end. All passes have been stopped for 10 days, none are given out, and the old ones are not received." Further reporting from the Buffalo Commercial newspaper said that it was estimated that around 3,000 men and boys came over just from the Brooklyn side within an hour or two before dark. One family that likely witnessed the bridge being seized were the Smiths, specifically Al Smith and his young son, Alfred, the future governor of the state, along with the rest of his family, who lived at 174 South Street, just under the span of the bridge on the Manhattan side.